I've kind of noticed something about journeys. I don't know if you've noticed this too, but journeys always seem to have hope and fear with them. It seems like every journey you go on, you can have hopes and fears. Physical journeys, spiritual journeys, emotional journeys, there are always hopes and fears. After Christmas, I went back down to South Carolina for a few days, and before a long journey like that in the car, there's some hopes and fears. You hope for good weather. I did not have it. You hope for good traffic. I did not have it. You hope your child will not freak out being in the car for 10 hours. She did pretty good. But you fear things. You fear traffic jams. You fear accidents. You fear bad weather. You fear cranky children. You hope you'll get there and you'll have a great time. Every journey has hopes and fears. I remember the journey to come here to Derry was filled with hopes and fears. There's always a bit of fear when you start a new job at a new place. Am I making the right choice? Will I find friends there? Will we find a home? Will we be there a long time? Is this a good mood? There's always these fears. There's hopes. Can this be a place we can be a long time? Will this bring happiness and joy and community? There's always hopes and fears with every journey, with every change. I was watching on Facebook last night, and I had a friend, another pastor friend, who was in the depths of fear around maybe halftime of the Buffalo Bills game. He was a big Buffalo fan. He's like, oh, no, they're going to blow it again. The Bills always blow it. He was giving into fear. And then you can see him giving into hope a little bit, and then at the end, despair. But what do you expect? He's a Bills fan. It's going to happen. Haven't won a playoff game since 1995. It's sad. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Patriots. My friend Joey Owsley. It's a tough day for Joey. The Patriots lost. So you have some choices. You can fear. All the pundits are out there. Fear, the Patriots dynasty is over. It's all done. They're never going to win again. Or you can choose hope. Well, you still might have Belichick. Brady might come back, or you might get a good quarterback. You have another season. Often, for me, I was a South Carolina Gamecocks fan, so pity me for that. But often at the end of the year was the best time of hope because you hadn't lost any games in the next season yet. You could actually hope for a second you might be good. The fear is you're still going to be horrible. And that fear often comes true, but you have hope. That was the best time to be a Gamecocks fan. Have you ever had to choose between hope and fear? When you find yourself in the midst of both of them, sometimes you're actually scared to hope because you're afraid if you hope too much, your heart might be broken, that the fear will eventually take over. But then if you choose fear and you hold on to that, you can end up locking your heart away. And it may not break, but it'll atrophy from not being used. Every journey is a combination of hope and fear. I imagine with Mary and Joseph, they had a lot of hopes and fears. When you get told, hey, you're going to give birth to a son, it's kind of God's son, but it's yours too. It's a little bit complicated. Don't try to understand it. I can imagine some fears there. How's this going to work? Are my neighbors going to understand? What am I going to tell my parents? Are they going to yell at me? What's life going to be like with Joseph? What's life going to be like raising the Son of God? Are there extra parental expectations attached with that? Does God pay alimony? I don't know. There's a lot of fears there. But then maybe there's some hope there too. Maybe this child really will save the world from its sins. Maybe this child is the hope we've all had as a whole nation of Israel for so long. Maybe this child is the hope of the world. I think it's often that way when you start a journey of not really knowing where you're going to end. There's things you can fear, and there are things you can hope in. I think that's what Epiphany Sunday is all about, hopes and fears. The Magi see a star, and to them in all their stargazing wisdom and wonder, they have a sense something important has happened, something good has happened. And so they travel. Maybe even as far from Alaska. You could have gone the eastern route from Alaska all the way around, I suppose. But they travel in hope of something. You got to have a strong hope to make such a journey, to see something. You don't exactly know what it is, but you know it must be good. I often think of heaven that way. People sometimes ask me what heaven's like, ask specific questions. My answer is usually I don't know. There's not a lot of information about heaven. What I say ultimately is, I think God is there, and I think it's good. That's all I can really know. But I have hope in that. And maybe that's enough. The Magi had that one point of light, that star, and they said, this marks something significant, something important. We want to be there. We want to be a part of that. They chose hope in that moment instead of fear. Can you think of a time you chose hope instead of fear? New job, new family situation, new beginning for a work, for a country, for a city. There was also opportunity for fear, though. Herod was a king who was known to be a bit of a jerk. He killed a couple of his sons because he was afraid they wanted to take his throne. Killed his wife because he was afraid she wanted to take his throne. Killed a bunch of people because he was afraid they wanted to take his throne. Sometimes when we love something so much, we can actually end up giving into fear, protecting what we think is so important. They end up losing everything. Fear is a way of doing that to us. Well, the wise men visit Herod, and Herod kind of understands the prophecy. He knows he's not the real king of the Jews. He's just kind of puppet king. So as he tried to kill these others, he's suddenly like, well, this child represents a threat. And he was afraid. What's interesting, though, in the Gospel of Matthew, it says, Herod was afraid, and all of Jerusalem with him. See, it wasn't just Herod who was afraid. It was all of Jerusalem. Imagine when you get a whole city, a whole country steeped in fear about a person or a thing or a group. When you have everyone's fear feeding off each other, that's often when the worst things in the world tend to happen. How did Hitler convince the whole nation to put a group of its citizens in concentration camps? It's fear. Fear is contagious. Fear is powerful. It motivates people. How did our own country convince us to intern citizens who are of Japanese descent into camps? Fear. We were scared. Fear makes us do things we wouldn't normally do. But fear is such an easy thing to appeal to. It's hard to appeal to our rational sense. It takes longer than a minute. And in this world of minute advertisements, minute TikTok videos, Instagram, all these short things, the quickest way is through fear and greed. And so we so often choose fear. We choose fear to motivate each other. Half the ads on TV are all about scaring you into things. If you don't have this car, you're not in a safe enough car, you can get hurt. If you don't do this diet, you won't be healthy enough. If you don't take this supplement, you're not going to be healthy enough. If you don't use this product, you're not going to be pretty enough. If you don't take this test prep, you're not going to be smart enough. It's always fear. Can you think of very many political ads that haven't in some way tried to touch on fear in the past 20 years? Even going back to that famous commercial with the wolves. Do you remember that one? I forget which election that was. I think I was a kid. I'm young. Feeling old sometimes, though. But we have these fears. We appeal to fear. Herod gets all of Jerusalem to be in fear with him. And that's how it allows him to go after and kill every infant that's 2 years or under in that area. They tag along with him. And he wants the Magi to join in with the fear. Well, come and tell me when you find the baby. I want to pay him homage too. He was lying. I know that's hard to believe, a politician or a king lying. It happens every once in a while. He was lying to him. And so ultimately, the wise men, the Magi, had to make a decision. Give in to fear, live into hope. Do we go back to Herod? Do we go home another way? Have you ever had to make that decision in a moment? Do I give in to fear and the motivations it makes me want to do? Sometimes the motivations aren't always bad. Sometimes it's fear of our security or our safety. So we go overboard, or we don't take risks, or we don't let people in, or we don't love our neighbors as ourselves because we're scared for our own safety. The motivations aren't always wrong. Sometimes we hope, and hope can make us do silly things sometimes too. So they're there in that moment having to decide between hope and fear. I wonder how often you find yourself at that crossroads when you're on a journey. And you've been balancing both. You've thought about the fears. You've thought about the hopes. You're trying to make the best decision, but eventually there comes a fork in the road. Which way am I going to go? Am I going to go back to fear with Herod? Am I going to go back home another way in hope? Have you made that decision for yourself? The Magi choose to go home another way, not to give in to fear. And Mary and Joseph, they have to flee their country. They go to Egypt out of fear, but in hopes that they can return, in hopes of the promises of fulfillment that, yes, God will anoint this child, that God is doing something special in Jesus, that Jesus really will save his people. I wonder if Mary and Joseph kind of thought that wasn't going to happen when they fled to Egypt, that we're not even with our people anymore. How are we going to do this? We're not even in our same country. How is he going to save Israel from Egypt? Some scholars kind of suggest that maybe Joseph died in Egypt. He never got to see Jesus be the fulfillment of God's promises. We never really hear much about Joseph later. We don't see him at the cross like Mary in the Gospel of John. I kind of wonder, maybe, did Joseph die in Egypt? And I always kind of wondered, did they make the right choice? But they hoped in that moment that if we flee now, there will be a day we can return. There will be the fulfillment of God's promises. Kind of reminds me of cathedral builders who start a cathedral. They're never going to see the end of it. But they hope one day that cathedral will be built. What they started will find fulfillment. The people who planted the oaks out here weren't ever going to see them grow as tall as they are today. But they had hopes that somehow there'd still be a church here in the shadow of the trees they planted long ago. That's often how it is. The work we start, we hope it finds fulfillment. As parents, we often don't see the full fulfillment of our children's lives. We may not see grandkids or great-grandkids, but we have hope. And it doesn't keep us from saying, well, we're not going to do this because we're too scared. We won't see how it all ends. We rarely see how it all ends. But we have hope that it ends well and it ends good. 3 weeks ago, we looked at Mary's song, the Magnificat from the Gospel of Luke, and Mary sings this song about what God has done. But what's interesting is the tense is actually a future tense. It's just a tense that is so certain of the future that you can talk about it as if it's already happened. That's kind of a picture of hope. The hope we have in Jesus, that we can be so certain that this will come to a good end. We can talk about it as if it already has. Do you live into hope? We're here in a new year. What are your hopes? What are your fears? 2020 is a big year for people. It's an election year. That can bring up hopes. It can bring up fears. It's a year of graduation for some of our youth, hopes and fears. Beginnings of high school, beginnings of junior high, changes in jobs. Maybe it's your first year without kids in the home. Maybe it's your first time leaving your home and moving to a new place. It's always a year of change. Here we are at the beginning. I'm sure you have some hopes and some fears for this year. That's normal. That's okay. But the promise of the gospel is there's a point of light that will guide you and say, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. I will be with you, and I will be for you. Even in the valley of the shadow of death, you need to fear no evil, for I will be with you. My rod and my staff will comfort you. There will be fears. There will be hopes. And ultimately, you get to choose which one you want to live into. This Epiphany Sunday, as we think about the star and the Magi and this table that reminds us who Christ is and what Christ has done, I hope together we as a church can proclaim we choose hope. Because that's what the world needs. They need a group like the Magi to choose hope despite the fear all around them. That's what the church can be. People often ask, was the church going to be around much longer? The whole church? It seems to be just slowing, and membership's always going down. It doesn't seem to be as important in the world anymore. Is there a place for the church in today's world? And all these changing demographics. And I say, yeah, there's always a place for hope. There's a place for people who can gather as a community and say, despite everything else, we're going to choose hope, and we're going to show you what that looks like. Because sometimes we can be so lost in darkness and fear, we need to be shown what it looks like to hope, to live into hope. That's what the church can be. That's what the church is always called to do, together as a community, like the wise men, following one point of light because you know something good is at the end. That's the church. Journeying together, following a light, not exactly knowing where you're going or what you're even going to see, but knowing it's important and it's good, and modeling that hope. And that's what the world needs. Maybe we can all do a better job of proclaiming that hope instead of giving in to despair so often, choosing the fear. Can together we choose hope for ourselves, for our communities, for our neighbors, for the world? So I want you to think about that this week. In 2020, how can we show the world what it looks like to hope and live into that hope? Even if we may not find its fulfillment, but we can start it on the way. Like the great cathedrals, like the towering oaks, what can we start in hope that will bring joy and peace and love and hope together for the world? Let us pray together. Almighty God, thank you. You are a God who is with us and for us, who guides us, sometimes with light, sometimes with words, sometimes with prophets, or a still small voice. Lord, help us to recognize the fears and hopes that go with every journey. Help us ultimately to choose hope and live into hope and share that hope with the world. Amen.